Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Mr. 50mm. You can also call me Chris. In this video, we are having a look at the Canon 1D Mark II N. I actually got this a little bit on a whim. You see, I'd actually noticed one in a local pawn shop. The price seemed okay. It was 299 Canadian buckaroos, and it came with the 50mm f1.8 STM, the newer one. However, that 1D2N was not meant to be. I went to have a look at it, and when I actually got it in my hands, I noticed it was really, really banged up. Even worse, when I looked through the finder, I came to realize that the bottom part of the finder was not functioning. The right side was fine, but the bottom was just black. So that kind of turned me off it, so I left. Later that day, though, I decided, again, on a bit of a whim, to look up what 1D cameras were available at one of Canada's premier camera shops, probably, Henry's. And so I asked Henry about their stock of 1D cameras, and to my surprise, a regular 1D Mark II came up for just 159.99 Canadian buckaroos. And for this specific weird period, it was eligible for free shipping, double bonus. So I just had to pay the tax, which meant that the camera came up to less than 190 Canadian buckaroos for a flagship camera. That's kind of crazy, right? So yeah, I went ahead and bought it. What was actually more crazy was that when it arrived, it was not a regular 1D2, but the slightly improved 1D Mark II N. And it came with the original dual charger, which is kind of hard to find and actually expensive. I know, we're not looking at the original 1D classic, the CCD, the magical Canon thing. But unless I find a crazy deal on it, I'm probably not going to be paying the current going price for that thing. It's quite expensive. But with that, let's get into why I really like the 1D Mark II N. It really grew on me. And at this point, I'm just going to call it the 1D2N from now on. What is the Canon 1D2N? Well, it's this camera here, obviously, and it is a Canon DSLR. It was released in September of 2005, and it features a 8.2 megapixel APS-H CMOS sensor. That means 1.3 crop. It's a flagship 1D series Canon camera body, and it's kind of the 2.5th generation, being a refresh of the original 1D Mark II. The camera does feature the Canon EF mount. The camera is also good from ISO 100 to 1600 or from 50 to 3200 with expansion enabled. The shutter is good for 30 seconds to 1/8,000th of a second, and it's rated for 200,000 shutter clickety clicks. The flash sync speed is up to 1/250th of a second, and the autofocus is handled by a 45-point system. Camera's metering is handled by a 21-zone system. The rear panel features a 2.5-inch 230 K-dot rear LCD. There it is. And the OVF is approximately 100% coverage at around 0.72 times magnification. The 1D2N features both a CF card and SD card slot, both of which are populated right now, and it can shoot at about 8.5 FPS for 22 RAWs. And it uses a very chunky NP-E3 battery rated for 1200 shots. In total, this camera comes in at 1,560 grams with a battery and memory card. So it's got a bit of weight to it. And when it was new, the MSRP for the 1D2N was 4,000 USD, or roughly 6,771 now dollars, or 9,350-ish in Canada monies. operation and feel. If you've seen my older reviews on the 1DS Mark I or the Mark II, this will feel probably pretty similar. The 1D2N features some quality of life improvements over those, such as the larger screen, but for the most part, it's a very similar experience. And I guess it begs repeating in this video. The 1D2N is a hell of a square brick. It's quite heavy, but I find it is well balanced. I will say, for anyone coming from even a kind of heavy mirrorless camera, you might be taken aback as to how much heft is in these, but it is also very well made. So there's some pros to some of the weight. Side note, with this 40mm pancake on this camera, the lens barely extends beyond the camera grip. And that's pretty nice because it really does make these 1D bodies quite a bit more carryable. I actually don't mind taking these out when I have the 40mm on there because they actually still fit in my bag okay. Much better than other lens camera combos. All right, tangent over. The 1D2N has fairly nice grips. I personally find they fit my hand pretty well. However, you will notice that the grip only has molding for the index finger or middle finger here, slash whatever. It has a molding for your hand here only on the landscape orientation. On the vertical grip section, it's just straight down. I would have liked if it were perfectly mirrored, but I don't use the vertical grip that much anyways, so it doesn't super bug me. Being a pro body, this is very laden with dedicated controls all over the camera. And being a Canon camera, it has the Canon's iconic 2-command dial system. One right here, just behind your shutter, and the big old one for your thumb. However, this camera did not incorporate the AF joystick of the 20D, or the center rear button you normally get on your rear command dial. I find, at least for the AF joystick, this is a bit of a miss given how many AF points there are. And again, because this is a pro body, we don't have a set of PASM, or we don't have a PASM dial here. Instead, we use Canon's set of press and holds to manipulate things such as camera mode, ISO, drive mode, that kind of stuff. I kind of like the system, but I do admit it takes getting used to, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. Which leads me to the next point, which I'm less on board with. It's the navigation of the menus. This is also something that requires a press and a hold. Oh. This is something that I get at the time that this camera was created, or at the time that they designed these things. The idea was to reduce accidental presses. But what it really does is slow down navigation, and it makes the system, for me, less intuitive. I am used to it now, but there's a reason why the 1D2N was the last pro camera body from Canon to implement this on their menu. Now, once you do grapple with the controls, the menus are pretty straightforward. They are not as amazing as the simple 20D menu, but close to the simplicity of the 30D menu. You basically get pages and lists of camera settings, playback, and setup pages with custom functions. Easy peasy, Canon squeezy. So the rear panel is one of the things that was changed from the 1D2. It got bigger, it got brighter, but the pixel count stayed the same. However, I do find that the panel itself is quite usable, and here it is against the 1DS Mark II. You can see that other than it being a bit more scaled out and it being a little brighter, they're basically very, very similar. Apparently, with the improved brightness, you get improved camera angles, or sorry, you get improved viewing angles. And let's see. To me, I don't really notice a difference. However, I will point out that I do like the panel on the 1D2N way more than the panel on the 1D3. And of the panels from the 1D3 era, I really dislike the rear display on those. Now, the 1D2N also features a top LCD panel, and yes, it is blue, so it's amazing. Another thing that was introduced in the 1D2N was picture styles, and you can see it here in the menu system. This was not something that was in the 1DS Mark II. You can see they had Canon's other system, but basically it is the ability to control Canon's JPEG processing, kind of like proto film sims from Fujifilm. I'm not really going to talk about this since, again, I really like shooting the RAWs and I don't really like exploring the JPEGs, so moving on. The OVF. It is great, big, bright, and packed with a lot of info. It's also easy to parse and well laid out. On the right side of your OVF, you got your exposure compensation and your buffer depth. On the bottom, you have things like shutter speed, aperture, ISO. This wouldn't be a 1D without mentioning, of course, it has a built-in microphone. Not for video, of course, for annotating images, voice annotation. Wow. Let's listen. This is the voice annotation feature on the Canon 1D Mark IIN. Let's see how it sounds. Or let's hear how it sounds. Alright, that's all. It sounds as you'd expect from a 22-year-old camera. Lastly, card door. Normally, not really something worth noting, but I literally just noticed it on the 1D2N. When you pull the lever open, it actually has a little text there, and it indicates the direction to turn your lever in to open your card door. I honestly never noticed this, and I thought it was a neat little touch. And once I noticed it on this, I did check. Yes, it is also on the 1DS and even on the 1DX. There. Neat. Overall, in terms of operation, the 1D2N is a joy to use. Image quality and autofocus. Being 22 years old-ish at the time of writing this video, or 21, I can't math very good. Anyways, we obviously are not going to be comparing this to the new Sony a7R6 and its 66 point whatever megapixel full frame sensor. And I'll be frank, or Chris, I really like the output of the 1D2N. 8.2 megapixels is generally still enough to work with. And this camera is of the era of the AA filter, so per pixel sharpness won't be like modern cameras, but it's perfectly capable of making a nice image. Here's one thing to consider. APS-H. It's actually kind of fun to use. And I get that when they did this camera, it was kind of a compromise. In the days of old, you had to choose between having lower resolution and a smaller sensor to get you that quick 1D series and its ability to crank out around 8.5 frames per second. Or you could choose between full frame goodness and big resolution with the 1DS camera. But it's slower. You get like 3 frames per second, not 8. So by using this slightly smaller sensor, you get, in theory, the advantages of having something bigger than APS-C, but something faster than full frame. And here's the thing as well, because it is an in-between, this thing only mounts EF lenses. There are no lenses specifically designed to take advantage of the 1.3 crop, but I really don't mind it. And I feel that the compromise actually does work. 1.3 kind of makes it feel like you're not losing much compared to 1.6 on Canon cameras. Maybe you just lose some poopy corners. And for the 40mm pancake, that results in around a field of view equivalent of 52mm, which is pretty great. And using wide-angle lenses leaves them still being pretty wide. And 8.2 megapixels actually, when it comes to pixel pitch, leaves us with a pretty chunky pitch of around 8.2 microns. Pretty close to the 9 micron fat pixel goodness. APS-C cameras of this era that were also 8 megapixels had pitches close to 6.4 microns, quite a bit smaller. Now, I am genuinely a little sad that these sensors are kind of a part of a bygone era, but it kind of makes sense. Keeping around an extra format that really was meant for pretty niche applications probably wasn't a great idea, especially once the 1DX series cameras came in and blended both 1DS and 1D features. At any rate, when it comes to things like dynamic range, I think the 1D2N holds up pretty well. Again, because of the fact that this is not a APS-C, but it's not quite full frame, you do get more DR than I think you'd be expecting. Now, it's not going to be winning any modern comparisons, but I personally find it is fine. You don't get as much room for recovery, and you can't really push the shadows that much, but that is expected for a camera of this age. And again, when you compare it to APS-C cameras of the time, it does hold up better than those cameras. With that, let's have a look at some noise samples. When it comes to noise performance, the camera's gravy zone is obviously going to be in the 100 to 400 range. 800 is also fine, and 1600 to 3200 for me are still workable. I think that 1600 cleans up pretty well, and the color noise is pretty easily suppressed with modern software. Again, not the AI stuff, just the regular noise reduction. Detail retention is also good at this point. At 3200, color noise still clears up pretty well, but you do notice a greater loss in detail. But again, it's not an unworkable image. I also want to point out that this camera is pre-auto ISO days. Just an FYI. I personally don't mind it, but I do admit it's pretty convenient. Let's get to autofocus. This thing rocks. I admit the 45-point system isn't perfect, and the coverage is not a bajillion percent. It is that larger oval that you see in the Finder. But it's still fairly good for a DSLR. And I do want to point out, though, for this camera, its cross points, there are not 45 of them. There are only 9, and they're in a diamond pattern in the center of the frame. And In the center, you have your extra sensitive cross point. So it's the really good one. So for the most part, I still found myself not utilizing the 45 points that much, but mostly using the center point. The system itself, despite having kind of a reasonable number of points, is fairly rudimentary compared to newer system. When it's in the AI servo / tracking mode, it doesn't even really show you what point that it's using unless you told it to use a specific point. And it obviously doesn't have subject recognition, no bum slap tracking technology here. But the system is quick. The focus speed and accuracy were generally very good, and the system is overall very predictable. In fact, I would say with practice on the 1D2N, you can very much still use it for sports and action. To demonstrate this, I made my tiny human run away from me in an ultra-scientific test of the camera's AF chops. I used the center point to track, and I just let the camera rip. Let's have a look. Obviously, not all of these shots were keepers, but I honestly think it did a good job. The only annoying thing was the buffer. 22 shots is not bad for the era, but nowadays we're spoiled for way bigger buffers. And we're also spoiled for modern card write speeds. Waiting for the 1D2N buffer to clear was at times annoying since my tiny human, at this point, does not always do things on command, and so I had to kind of be ready to do the bursties of sciencey testing for pure sciencey goodness. And that proved sometimes difficult with the buffer still clearing. Plus, unlike the 1D3, the system in the 1D2N did not get embroiled in controversy and recalls. But with that, let's actually have a listen to the shutter of the 1D2N. Oh, I had it on 10-second delay. Let's do that again. There we go. That is excellent. It's a very nice sounding shutter, good amount of clacks. It's not quiet though, I will say that. You will not be stealthing around with the 1D2N. But it is a great noise to behold. Recommendation and conclusion. The 1D2N is a camera that I think doesn't always get the credit it deserves. Obviously, it's a little bit being overshadowed by the original 1D, which gets many attentions for being the only Canon DSLR to feature a CCD, but I personally think it's just too expensive, especially when you can get the 1D2N for a fraction of the price. Obviously, not as noticeable as the 1D Classic, but again, I really enjoyed the experience of using this camera. And the slightly bigger LCD, for me, made a bit of a difference too. It felt like I was using a newer camera than it actually was. The dual card slots were extremely convenient, and I think for someone that doesn't already have a fat collection of CF cards, the SD card is an excellent option. Although, I will admit, I do believe the size limit is 32 gigabytes. I tried it with a couple 64 gigabyte cards, and it didn't really want to work. Although I believe you could format those to be the smaller partitions, and that should work, but then obviously you're losing some of that potential space. At any rate, for a bit of perspective, the last couple 1D2Ns I saw on the online auction sites sold for around 160 US dollar dues on the low end. On the expensive end, it was maybe 300 USD, but that happened far less than the cheaper ones. And these are units that are confirmed working with a charger. Working original 1D classics seem to routinely sell for $450 for ones that are in okay shape. And untested ones I've seen have sold for higher than the price of working 1D2Ns. So if you do want to buy a 1D2N though, I will say, make sure to look for one that does include a way to charge the batteries, either the stock charger or some sort of third party. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck using a universal charger, which does work, it's just less convenient. And on the note of batteries, at the time I'm recording this video in June, June of 2026, replacements still exist. You can still buy them. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I'm glad they're still purchasable right now. That said, do I recommend the 1D2N? Actually, kind of no. No, if you're just looking to get a DSLR to get started. If you are, at around 160 USD, the low end of what these are valued at, you actually have a lot of choice. And they're considerably more modern and more convenient to have, even if they're APS-C cameras. Although that's not entirely the case. But going, I think, with a more modern DSLR is something to not forego. Partly because you'll likely get a camera that is smaller and more modern. And I actually think if you are patient, you can probably get a Canon 5D too. It'll probably be in rough shape, but it'll work. But otherwise, for the 160 USD, you can look at getting a 60D or 7D. And again, these are smaller but more modern cameras, offering overall better technical performance. And that's not nothing. But I will say, I would recommend this for someone that is curious about APS-H. I had a blast playing with this camera and enjoying the uniqueness that comes with shooting this format. And again, APS-H cameras are, at this point, kind of a rarity. And I think this is the cheapest way to get into trying this style of sensor. Everything else just costs more, like the original 1D Classic, or the 1D3, or the 1D4, Kodak DCS series, 560, 660, 760, and I think finally the Sigma Quattro H. That I think is a pretty good list of APS-H censored cameras, and they all cost more than this. The other thing is that I would recommend this for anyone that just wants to try a Canon Pro Body. Again, this is one of the cheapest ones that you could buy, and it's really quite good. But with that, I think we are done. Let me know, did I miss any APS-H cameras? And let me know what you think of this sensor format in general. Was it a good idea? A bad idea? Should it stay dead? Should it be brought back? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe a super thanks if you're into that. Till next time, bye.